Multinational companies are complaining that China is becoming a hostile business environment as the security state's reach expands. The U.S. Secretary of Commerce, who visited Beijing in late August, says patience is running thin for investors who now have to contend with, quote, exorbitant fines without any explanation, revisions to the counter-espionage law, which are unclear and sending shockwaves through the U.S. community, raids on businesses, a whole new level of challenge. The scariest aspect is the growing numbers of business travelers facing arrest and detention. Beijing has also increased its use of exit bans, preventing people from leaving the country. This includes both foreign citizens and Chinese executives working with international corporations, raising concerns that China is not really open for business except on its own terms. The U.S. has even issued a travel warning, quote, reconsider travel to mainland China due to the arbitrary enforcement of local laws, including in relation to exit bans and the risk of wrongful detentions. Joining us in the studio is DW's Asia analyst Clifford Coonan. Clifford, can you tell us more about these exit bans? Have Chinese authorities provided any explanation, or are they truly arbitrary?
Well, I think as US-China relations have worsened, they've become more arbitrary and they've become scarier, harder to work out exactly what's going on. It's quite a broad issue here. We have sort of very profile global issues like the detention of two Canadian nationals in apparent retaliation for the detention of a senior Chinese executive. Then you have more sort of classic espionage cases where people are tried in secret and they just go to jail and we don't know what happens. And then you have the exit bans where you have executives who are involved in various business dealings or whatever who are just not allowed to leave the country and they're stuck in their hotels in Shanghai or in Guangzhou or wherever they are, but they don't really know why they're there and what's going on.
And in the most extreme cases, these people are foreign nationals, including Americans. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think particularly since the trade war has intensified in the middle of the last decade, we've seen a lot more Americans being involved, a lot more foreigners being involved. So it used to be that it was Chinese-born Americans, who have both Chinese passports and Americans. But as we saw with the two Michaels, this case in the two Canadians, they were not Chinese. And in one particular case, who I spoke to Harrison Lee, who's the son of Kai Lee, and his father was detained on espionage charges. Now, his father is Shanghai-born, but he's an American citizen, and he's been jailed since 2016. And in the interview, Harrison said how he hasn't seen his father in person for 7 years, and he reckons it was his father's nationality was the reason that he was targeted by the Chinese government and imprisoned. And we can listen to him here.
I think that's the most frightening aspect of hostage diplomacy, that literally anybody can be targeted simply for their nationality. In my dad's case, he is an American citizen, and because of his blue passport, he was targeted by the Chinese government for leverage, and that's the simple reality of the situation.
Yeah, so we see there how he refers to hostage diplomacy. That's a big factor in the reasoning behind why a lot of these people are forbidden from leaving China. And I asked him, with this as a background, whether he felt that whether people were taking a risk going to China.
Yeah, 100%, right? I mean, if people like my dad, ordinary people, right? It's not like, oh, again, he didn't have any political connections. He doesn't have a lot of money. I mean, anyone visiting China for whatever reason, right? If they're a foreign national, they have this risk of being targeted for hostage diplomacy. And that's why there is this travel advisory. That's precisely why this advisory exists. Is because of that risk. And I think just a lot of people are not aware of that, especially, say, in the business community.
Clifford, do we have an extent to which international companies are reassessing the risk of sending businessmen and women into China? How much are these exit bans spooking executives?
I think they definitely spooked people. The situation was already pretty bad because a lot of people who went to China got stuck there during the COVID lockdown, which was very extreme in China, and they couldn't leave and they didn't see their families for in some cases, years. But aside from that, this political aspect to it is very important, and I think it has made an impact on how companies are behaving. We had an Irish executive, Richard O'Halloran, who was detained in Shanghai over what looks like a business dealings issue where there was a purchase of a plane and the ownership of the plane was disputed, and he couldn't leave for many months until eventually he was freed. But when that kind of thing happens, it really does spook foreign companies. And it's kind of happened at the same time as relations between the US and China have worsened. And I think it's a big risk now for companies sending people there. They risk huge liabilities if their people get stopped there. And so I think a lot of it is going to depend on how relations develop now between the US and China, whether people will start coming back. But there's still a lot of reluctance about going there.
I think it's fascinating that those who are choosing to go, I mean, I think everybody just thinks it ain't going to happen to me, right? It's going to happen to someone else, but not me. Banning business people at a time when China is seeking to grow its economy, to do business with the world, that seems so counterproductive. So, Clifford, I wonder, why is this happening?
Well, I think it's like we said many times before, Melissa, that when you look at this situation, politics always trumps economics in China. And this is very much a decision, a political decision, I think. It's tied in with the relationship between the West and China. And regardless of the impact that these business people are having, I think that ultimately, if there's a feeling within the Communist Party that it's better to freeze out the West, I think that it's going to lead to these kind of exit bans happening. It's going to lead to people, like you say, nobody wants to be the first to be arrested. So they're quite happy for the situation to continue, that people don't want to go to China. We are seeing signs of a reset now in Western relations with China, particularly with US relations with China. So maybe the situation will change. But ultimately, I think the whole exit ban strategy, and it is a strategy, comes down to political reasoning.
So this all goes down to Xi Jinping.
Ultimately, it does come down to Xi Jinping. Particularly, he has made all these decisions that don't make economic sense for a lot of people.
It's been like that for quite a number of years. It doesn't seem like economics is a factor for him until it gets really, really serious, until like the warning signs are out there, red flags everywhere that he has to change course.
Yeah, that's right. So he clearly follows his own course. He knows what he wants to do in terms of the Marxist-Leninist ideology or the Communist Party ideology, and that's going to be his primary concern. It's not going to be worrying about the impact of international trade, even on the Chinese economy.
That's very fascinating, especially at a time also in the EU where they're also looking to resume business as usual with the Chinese, all of this happening to American citizens, to Chinese citizens working for multinational companies. Very, very troubling and hard to predict when you're trying to do business with China in this kind of unpredictable environment. Clifford Coonan, thank you so much for joining us. DW also speaks to Li Mengzhu, a Taiwanese businessman who was detained in China and accused of espionage and stealing state secrets. He was also a victim of an exit ban. And you won't believe what Chinese authorities considered as incriminating evidence. Here's DW's James Chater reporting from Hsinchu in northern Taiwan.
Li Mengzhu is finally back home in Taiwan. He recently returned to Chinese authorities held him for 4 years. Now Hsinchu, the city where he was born and raised, looks different.
With some new buildings, it's like new hospitals, new shopping malls, new stores. That's good.
These are the pictures that cost Li 4 years of his life. Not his food, but the Chinese police in the distance. It was in 2019, and he was on a regular business trip to the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen. Police were gathering here, right next to Hong Kong, which was gripped by pro-democracy protests at the time. Li says he was curious about the police gathering and was in public space, but that Chinese officials forced him to confess to espionage.
They beat the table very loudly for several times and asked me to follow them. If you follow us, maybe the charge will be as low as you want. 大家好，我是李梦居。
Li left prison in 2021, but a Beijing-imposed exit ban kept him in China until recently.
The freedom is priceless. The freedom is just like the fresh air you breathe. If you lose the freedom, you will feel suffocated.
The problem for Li and many others here is that Chinese President Xi Jinping says Taiwan is sacred Chinese territory, and therefore Taiwanese people are his citizens. Li's experience has deepened his belief in the importance of defending Taiwanese autonomy. His old high school classmate Eric Yao offers some advice about dealing with the years lost in China.
Since he got back, I often joke with him. You have to treat it like you've come back from 4 years at Democracy University. You can only think of it like that. And in the future, you just don't go back.
Li now spends much of his time on human rights activist work, often talking about what the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, did to him.
And why do you feel it's so important to speak out about your experience in China?
But because I believe that I have justice in my mind. If I keep silent, there will be more and more victims will be arrested by the CCP government or other foreign government, authoritarian government.
Li feels safe here at home on Taiwan's northwest coast, even though China is less than 200 kilometers away across the sea. And going forward, he says, he's determined to do what he can to keep it that way.